Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your boring, musty life in Persia is doomed to change forever. Not because invaders are at the gates or the sky has split open, but because a man named Zarathustra has come to your village. From this moment on, even your dullest habits, the daily dust, and your silent waiting in line for water become a battleground of good and evil. You can no longer simply remain unnoticed. Every thought, every choice, even saying nothing, is now an act for which perhaps you will have to answer not only to your neighbors, but to yourself. Are you ready for an era where boredom becomes a crime and philosophy a disease that infects everyone? If so, listen closely. But before you settle in, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you are watching from and what time it is for you. I am really curious to see who has joined us. Now get comfortable. We're beginning. You wake up under the colorless morning sky of ancient Persia, where the sun never shines quite the way it does in stories, but rather sifts through a haze of dust and resignation. The ground beneath you is not the golden sand from the tales told by traveling minstrels, but a dull, cracked mixture of pebbles and disappointment. Everything in this world seems older than it really is, including you, and nothing ever quite manages to be interesting, not even the arrival of a new day. You stretch, not because you are particularly stiff, but because there is nothing else to do. In Persia, everyone stretches in the morning. It is tradition, like boredom, deeply rooted in the culture. Some say this is a sign of wisdom, others of despair. You are not sure which, but you are certain of one thing. Absolutely nothing has changed in living memory. Life here is a careful balancing act between surviving, keeping out of trouble, and not getting noticed by the more excitable priests, whose enthusiasm is the only thing louder than the ever present silence. Religion is everywhere, but in a way that makes you feel less alive, not more. It is as if the gods themselves have grown tired of their followers, watching the same sacrifices, hearing the same prayers, year after year, century after century. Today, as every day, you wander through the dusty streets. You pass by the squat temples, blocky, undecorated, always looking like they have been built more for shelter than worship. The priests shuffle by, muttering memorized chants, careful not to catch each other's eye, as if the mere act of acknowledgement could disrupt the fragile, boring equilibrium that is the real faith of Persia. You see the people, your people, moving in slow, practiced patterns, going about tasks that have not changed in centuries. They grind grain, fetch water, mend sandals. They do these things not with devotion, but with the hollow precision of those who have forgotten why they do them at all. Religion, as you experience it, is a layer of dust on everything. No one questions it, no one tries to clean it away, and certainly no one thinks to add anything new. In your youth, you once asked a priest why there are so many gods. He squinted at you as if you had asked why there are so many stones on the ground, and replied that this was simply how things had always been. There were gods for fire, for wind, for water, for sand, for the sickly sheep that refused to grow fat, gods for every small inconvenience and each rare stroke of luck. The stories were so old and so muddled that no one remembered where one god's business ended and another's began. And so the prayers are recited with the same interest that a scribe copies a ledger. The sacrifices, a chicken here, a handful of barley there, are given not with passion, but with the sense of paying off a small, tedious debt. No one expects miracles. The best you can hope for is not to draw attention, not to offend the wrong spirit, not to have your name spoken at the wrong moment, in the wrong tone. But today, as you trudge past the worn temple steps, something is different. It is almost imperceptible, like a new crack in a familiar wall. You overhear the cobbler muttering to his neighbor about a man in the hills, his words barely rising above a whisper, as if even rumors here are afraid of being heard. You pause, pretending to adjust your sandal, listening as the neighbor shrugs, uninterested. The mention of a new name in Persia is rare. Newness, in general, is rare. Yet you cannot help but feel that something is creeping into the settled dust of your world. Something about this man, Zoroaster, Zarathustra, the name is unclear and unimportant yet, nags at you. But then again, everything nags at you in Persia: boredom, heat, the relentless sameness. By midday, the sun is a pale circle, hanging high and bored in the sky, unwilling even to blaze. You find yourself sitting beside the old well, watching the others pass by, listening to more whispers about this prophet. You are not sure if you believe them. You are not sure you care. After all, what could possibly change in Persia? Here, even rumors get tired and lie down before supper. Still, for the first time in many years, you do not feel entirely certain about tomorrow being exactly like today. Perhaps that is the beginning of something, or perhaps it is merely another distraction, soon to be forgotten. Either way, the wind carries the name Zarathustra a little farther than you expected, and you, like everyone else, wait for something to happen, even if you would never admit it out loud. The next day, or perhaps the next week, time in Persia moves as slowly as cold honey. You find yourself once again on the same dusty street, though the dust seems somehow thicker, as if gathering for something important, which is, of course, unlikely. The world changes at the pace of a tired ox, and you have long since given up expecting surprises. Yet the rumors persist, low and stubborn, like the weeds that grow between temple stones. Today, the wind carries not only heat, but words, muffled and careful, spoken from the shadow of one mud brick wall to another. You hear it as you pass the women drawing water at the well, their faces drawn and tired, eyes darting just a little more than usual. A man who speaks to the fire, one of them murmurs, her voice so quiet it almost disappears into the sound of the bucket scraping stone. You keep walking, for there is nothing to see, or, at least, nothing you expect to see. But now your ears are open, straining for more. Perhaps it is the novelty, or perhaps you are simply tired of the same 10 stories told every evening by the same 10 men, their voices growing hoarser with each retelling. Now there is a new story, and in Persia, a new story is as rare as rain in the dry months. By the market, you overhear more. Two men, faces half hidden beneath their rough cloaks, speak in that hurried, anxious way reserved for news too strange to be trusted. He says the gods are not as we thought, whispers the first, his hands busy with a basket of onions. The second shrugs, as if this means nothing at all, but you notice he glances over his shoulder before replying. The gods have never been as we thought. That is the only thing we know for sure. You continue on, curiosity gnawing at you like a bored mouse. The day passes, heavy and slow, and by dusk, you find yourself drawn toward the outskirts of the settlement, toward the hills that have always been just out of reach, their outlines etched in permanent boredom against the horizon. The sky turns a sickly orange, and the heat fades, leaving behind the expectation of something, though you could not say what. There, you find a small group gathered, their shapes awkward and uneasy in the half light. You do not recognize most of them. They are not the usual storytellers, not the old men with their endless advice, but others, quiet ones, the sort who usually keep to themselves. They stand in a loose circle, as if afraid to get too close to one another or to the event at the center of their gathering. You edge closer, blending in as only the persistently unremarkable can. There is no fire, but in the center stands a man, or perhaps he is simply a man shaped idea, for all you can see of him is his silhouette against the fading sky. Someone whispers, "That is him. That is Zarathustra." The name does not sound like anything special, but you sense a weight in the air, an uncomfortable awareness as if the night itself is holding its breath. He does not look like a prophet. He does not look like anything at all, really. His clothes are plain, his face indistinct, the sort of man who could walk through a crowded market and be utterly forgotten by the time he passed the next stall. This, you suppose, is either very clever or very foolish. In Persia, it is always wise to look like no one in particular. Zarathustra begins to speak. At first, you cannot hear him. His voice is soft, but carries oddly, as if the words are not coming from him, but from the space between you and him. The people lean in, eager not to miss anything, though no one dares get too close. He speaks of fire, but not the fire in the hearth or the flames in the temple. He speaks of a fire that is both within and beyond, that sees and judges, that is not satisfied with stale offerings or rote prayers. The words do not mean much to you, at least not yet. They are like the first few drops of rain before a storm, odd, almost out of place, and yet promising something more. You glance at the faces around you. Some are skeptical, eyes narrowed, lips pressed thin. Others look afraid, as if they have wandered into the wrong story by accident. A few look strangely hopeful, as if the words are water to roots that have gone too long without. You realize, with a pang of discomfort, that you are listening, really listening. When was the last time you did that? Zarathustra says that the world is not merely a jumble of squabbling gods and mindless rituals. He suggests, in a voice as calm as a still pond, that perhaps there is a pattern, a reason, a purpose behind the monotonous days and endless nights. There is a battle, he says, between truth and lie, between light and darkness. The words are not dramatic, they are stated plainly, as if he is explaining the weather or the price of wheat. You expect someone to laugh, but no one does. Instead, you feel a chill, a rare thing in Persia. You wonder briefly if you are shivering with anticipation or dread. Maybe it is both. As the gathering dissolves, people drift away in small, silent groups. You linger, trying to remember everything you heard, but the details slip away, leaving only the sense that something has shifted. The dust is still here, the boredom is still thick, but there is a crack, barely visible, running through the surface of things. That night, as you lie awake on your thin mat, you hear the wind whispering. Perhaps it is only the breeze, or perhaps it is the echo of a new story, finally beginning to move. You wonder if you will ever sleep soundly again, now that you have tasted the tiniest drop of something like hope, or perhaps just a different kind of boredom. Either way, you know this. The name Zarathustra will not leave you now. It sticks, like sand in the folds of your clothing, irritating and persistent, hinting that something in Persia, after so many years of perfect monotony, is about to change. Not quickly, of course. Nothing in Persia happens quickly. But still, the rumors grow, and the hills suddenly seem much less distant. It is difficult to say how many days pass before you see Zarathustra again. In Persia, days have a way of slipping past, each one indistinguishable from the last, as if time itself is only half awake. But something is changing, and you are not the only one who feels it. The village, which once pulsed to the steady, boring rhythm of chores and rituals, now seems slightly offbeat. People gather in strange, silent clusters. There is a tightness around every conversation, like the anticipation before a storm that never quite arrives. One evening, when the sun is bleeding weakly into the sky and the flies are giving up for the day, you see a new crowd forming in the square near the well. You would like to say you are above curiosity, but the truth is, curiosity is all that stands between you and complete madness. So you drift closer, pretending you just happen to be passing by, as if you have never once done anything as dramatic as intentionally listen to a prophet. Zarathustra stands at the edge of the crowd. He is as unremarkable as ever, almost aggressively so. His robe is the exact color of dust. His beard is neither long nor short, just scraggly enough to be unimpressive. If you had not heard the whispers, you would take him for a scribe's assistant, or perhaps the sort of man who spends his days counting sacks of grain in a back room somewhere. And yet there he is, and the crowd is waiting for what? They do not know. He steps forward and clears his throat. The sound is so ordinary, so faintly embarrassing, that a few people glance away. But then he begins to speak, and you notice something odd. Everyone, even the most fidgety, falls still. Zarathustra's voice is gentle, with a dryness that suggests he, too, is not entirely convinced that anyone should be excited about anything. He does not shout, he does not gesture. Instead, he explains, as if to children, that there is a struggle in the world, not among the many gods, but between two forces, light and darkness, truth and lie. He calls them by names you have never heard, and the crowd shifts uneasily, as if hearing foreign words might make their sandals fall apart. He speaks of Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, who is not merely another god to be placated with chickens or barley, but a presence that demands, in the driest, most exasperating way possible, that you actually think about your choices. There is a murmur, not of excitement, but of confusion. In Persia, thinking is a dangerous business, and choice even more so. It is so much easier when everything is already decided for you. You realize, with a dull ache, that Zarathustra is not here to entertain or even to inspire. He is here to complicate things. The old ways were boring, yes, but they were at least clear. Every misfortune could be blamed on the wrong god, every good day on the right ritual performed at the right time. Now, Zarathustra is suggesting that you, yes, you, might actually be responsible for the state of your own soul. You glance at your neighbor, a man whose greatest ambition is to fall asleep before his wife begins reciting her endless list of grievances. He looks alarmed, as if Zarathustra has just suggested he rebuild his house using only thoughts and sand. You cannot blame him. After all, it was easier when evil was something the gods did for sport, rather than something you could accidentally encourage by being lazy, dishonest, or just not paying enough attention. Zarathustra continues, patiently, inexorably. His words are like drops of water wearing down a stone. He speaks of the importance of truthfulness, purity of thought, word, and deed. He tells you that every person must choose between siding with light or darkness, with Ahura Mazda or Angra Mainyu, the spirit of destruction and deceit. He says that every action, however small, tips the balance, not just for you, but for the whole world. You wait for someone to interrupt, to object, to point out the obvious flaw. Who, in their right mind, would choose darkness? But Zarathustra is one step ahead. He explains, almost apologetically, that most people choose darkness by accident, by habit, or by indifference. That inaction is itself a kind of decision, and that there is no safe place to hide between the two sides. At this, the crowd grows restless. A few mutter to each other, weighing the pros and cons of a universe where boredom is not only permitted, but possibly dangerous. Someone in the back snorts and shuffles away, muttering that life is hard enough without having to think about cosmic consequences. Still, more than a few linger. You sense something spreading through the crowd, not excitement, not yet, but a prickly discomfort, the feeling of a stone in your sandal that you can not quite shake out. Zarathustra's words have worked their way into you, stubborn and unwelcome. You remember the old days when the world was a chessboard and you were just a pawn. Now, the rules have changed and everyone is expected to be a player. As the crowd disperses, you find yourself wondering if this new religion, with its insistence on personal responsibility and constant vigilance, is not simply a new flavor of boredom, but a far more exhausting one. You imagine your life as a battlefield, every small action tipping the scale between light and darkness, and you feel a tiredness that goes all the way to your bones. You return home, where the shadows are long and the oil lamp burns low. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, considering for the first time whether your choice to ignore the day's chores was simply laziness or something darker. You have never felt so awake or so bored in your life, and as you drift into a shallow, uneasy sleep, you realize that Zarathustra's most dangerous power is not that he makes you believe, but that he makes you think. And in Persia, that is perhaps the greatest change of all. The days slide by, but you notice now that the sameness is broken. It is as if someone has introduced a single off key note into an endless, droning song. Every conversation, no matter how dull or routine, eventually drifts with the sluggishness of a muddy river back to Zarathustra and his increasingly unsettling proclamations. It is not just the poor or the idle who talk now. Even the priests, once as stable as the sun's rise and set, mutter in corners and cast wary glances at their dwindling congregations. You cannot help but notice the worry pinching their faces. For generations, their main job has been to remember old rituals and forget new problems. But Zarathustra, in his plain robe and dust colored beard, has become an uninvited guest at every hearth, every well, every marketplace, and worst of all, every thought. You are standing by the temple, pretending to be interested in the latest shipment of barley, when you overhear two priests whispering in tones so dry they could wilt a cactus. He talks of only two forces, says one, wringing his hands. No room for all the gods, for all our careful offerings and ceremonies. It is heresy, or at the very least, extremely inconvenient. The other sighs. He asks people to choose. If they choose wrongly, they will blame us. You pretend to be fixated on the barley. Nobody ever blames the barley. That evening, you find yourself wandering toward the edge of the settlement again, drawn by the growing crowd gathering around Zarathustra. There is a strange hunger in the air, not for food, but for meaning, for an answer to the question that nobody quite dares to ask aloud. What if he is right? What if the world really is not just an endless muddle of rituals and complaints, but a battlefield between two great forces, and each person, even the laziest, most forgettable one, matters? Zarathustra stands before the crowd, as ordinary as ever. He could be anybody, and perhaps that is the point. He speaks without passion, as if he is reading a weather report that everyone already knows by heart, but his words have the power to unnerve even the most stoic listener. He says, the greatest struggle is not against foreign invaders or famine or drought, but against the lie. There is a nervous shuffle in the crowd. Lies in Persia are as common as dust and almost as invisible. Zarathustra continues, every time you choose not to tell the truth, every time you look away from injustice, every time you do nothing when you could have acted, you help the darkness. His voice is steady, unremarkable, and for that reason, all the more alarming. There is no thunder, no wild gestures, only the calm certainty of someone explaining a household rule. You notice that some people bristle at his words. The blacksmith's wife, who has a reputation for creative storytelling, glares at the ground. The merchant, famous for his tricky scales, scowls openly, but no one interrupts. Perhaps it is curiosity, or perhaps fear. Fear that ignoring this plain man might be riskier than listening to him. Then Zarathustra names the darkness. Angra Mainyu, he calls it, the spirit of destruction, the father of lies, the enemy not just of the gods, but of every honest action, every small kindness, every truth told at a personal cost. He pauses, letting the name settle over the crowd like a chill draft. You feel it too, crawling up your spine. It is one thing to think of evil as a distant force, something for kings and heroes to worry about. But Zarathustra's evil is ordinary, lurking in every half truth, every shrug of indifference. As he speaks, you see people glancing at each other, quietly inventorying their own lives. Who among them, who among you, has not helped the darkness out of laziness, or habit, or fear? The answer, of course, is no one. Then Zarathustra introduces the opposite, Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, who is not interested in empty gestures or pointless sacrifices, but only in truth and righteousness. He makes it sound so simple, so obvious, that you almost laugh, until you realize how hard it is to be truthful, even in the smallest things. He does not tell people to abandon their old rituals, but he makes them seem oddly childish, like pretending to help in the kitchen when all you do is get in the way. He asks for something harder than ritual. He asks for attention, for honesty, for constant awareness. It is a boring kind of heroism, one that has no songs or statues, only the knowledge that every tiny act matters. The priests stand at the edge of the crowd, arms folded, lips tight. They do not shout or denounce. They wait, perhaps hoping that this new wave of discomfort will pass, that people will tire of being troubled and return to the comfort of tradition. But you sense it, a current running through the crowd. People will not forget these words. Boredom has at last been interrupted and replaced by anxiety. As the sun sinks and the crowd disperses, you feel a strange weight in your chest. For the first time, you are aware of your choices, your small daily betrayals and half truths. You feel exposed and yet oddly powerful. If even you can tip the balance between light and darkness, then perhaps, just perhaps, your life is not as meaningless as you always suspected. Of course, meaning is exhausting. The old boredom, at least, let you sleep soundly. Now you find yourself wide awake, replaying Zarathustra's words, wondering how to be truthful in a world that rewards comfortable lies. The very thought makes you tired. But as you lie on your mat, staring at the flickering shadows, you realize that you have seen something new in the faces of your neighbors. Fear, yes, but also a kind of hope. A hope so faint that it might still be mistaken for anxiety or perhaps for indigestion. Still, hope is hope, even in Persia, and you, for better or worse, have begun to listen. In the following days, you become aware of a new form of torment, the need to make choices, even when you would rather not make any at all. This is, perhaps, Zarathustra's greatest crime, introducing decision where once there was only habit. Before, life was a slow river that carried you along whether you wished it or not. Now, at every muddy fork, you must pick your own course. The novelty is not welcome. At first, you try to ignore it. You go through the motions of your daily routine with deliberate slowness, as if the old ways will assert themselves by sheer inertia. You sweep the same patch of dirt. You nod politely to the priests, who look more nervous each day. You make the same small bargains with the market vendors, haggling without conviction. But something is different. Every moment seems to demand a choice, a taking of sides, not in some grand, heroic battle, but in the dull, relentless skirmishes of everyday life. One morning, while drawing water at the well, you hear the gossip swirl and eddy around you. Zarathustra's words have become the new currency, exchanged with more care than coins. He says you must choose, always choose, hisses the weaver's wife, her hands red from dye, her voice tight with indignation. Choose what? Asks another more softly. The answer is a listless shrug. Everything, even nothing, is a choice now. You see the truth of it. Old arguments, once settled by tradition or seniority, now spiral out into philosophical tangles. Who should be first at the well? Who deserves the largest share of last season's barley? Should the children be allowed to nap in the shade, or must they practice vigilance in the heat? Every decision is a test, or worse, a revelation of secret allegiances to light or to darkness, though no one ever says these words out loud. At home, you are confronted by choices you did not know you were making. Your wife asks if you remembered to feed the goat, and when you say, of course, you catch yourself wondering whether that small lie has tipped some cosmic scale. The children squabble, and you intervene, but not out of fairness or wisdom, only because it seems the right thing to do. Are you now an agent of the wise Lord, or just trying to keep the peace? The old men still gather by the temple, but their stories are changing. Where once they boasted of great ancestors and lucky omens, now they speak in low voices about the burden of choosing. One sighs, there is no rest in this new way. Even in sleep, I dream of questions I cannot answer. Another, older still, shakes his head. We used to say that fate is a river and we are boats. Now it seems we are all expected to be our own river. You remember Zarathustra's latest sermon, if it can be called that. He does not preach in the way the priests do, with gestures and threats. He simply talks, as if explaining to a child the need to wash his hands. To do nothing is also to choose, he says, and in that choice, the darkness grows bolder. The words linger in your mind, stubborn as a weed. In the market, tempers flare more easily. Neighbors argue about whose responsibility it is to repair the communal wall. Each insists he is merely waiting for the other to act. But now, under the dull light of Zarathustra's teaching, waiting feels like a betrayal. We must choose, mutters the baker, staring at his calloused hands, even when we do not want to. You notice something new in yourself, a twitch of guilt at every half truth, every lazy omission. You begin to see yourself not just as a passenger in life, but as a participant, though the role is both exhausting and thankless. The priests do not help. They have started to mention Zarathustra by name, usually with a sigh or a muttered prayer for the restoration of order. They do not forbid his teachings, not yet. Instead, they offer extra rituals, longer prayers, as if hoping to drown out his influence with sheer volume. It does not work. If anything, the new rituals seem emptier than before, hollow shells that only remind everyone of the weight of personal responsibility. A few people, the most anxious, the most stubborn, try to return to the old ways entirely. They double their offerings, burn more incense, mutter prayers at every crossroads. But even they glance over their shoulders, as if fearing that the wise Lord is watching, weighing their sincerity. By sunset, you are exhausted in a way you have never been before, not just in body, but in mind. It is a strange kind of tiredness, not the fatigue of a day spent working in the fields, but the ache of too many choices, too much awareness. Even sleep brings no relief, for your dreams are now crowded with dilemmas. A goat that must be shared, a neighbor who asks for help, a stranger at your door. In each, you must choose, and the choices echo after you wake. You long for the old boredom, the comfort of habit, the certainty that nothing you did truly mattered. But that time is gone. Now, each day demands your attention, your decision, your uneasy conscience. You are a participant in the great battle, whether you want to be or not, and there is no going back. It takes only a handful of days for the disease of decision making to spread. Even those who once prided themselves on their indifference now find themselves swept into endless debates. You listen as at first the discussions are halting and awkward, but soon the whole settlement is infected. It turns out that beneath all that boredom, Persians have always loved a good argument. They just lacked anything worth arguing about. Now, every alley and market stall is an arena. People who have known each other for years now stare at one another across an invisible divide, trying to work out who is truly on the side of light and who is, perhaps, secretly a supporter of darkness, or even worse, simply indifferent. You would think that everyone, if given the choice, would eagerly join the ranks of truth and righteousness, but reality is far messier. The baker and the potter, who have never before exchanged more than a grunt, now squabble in the square about whether it is enough to avoid lying, or if one must always speak the truth, even when it hurts someone's feelings. Words matter, the baker says, jabbing a floury finger for emphasis. But intentions matter more, counters the potter, who has recently discovered the word intentions and uses it at every opportunity. The discussions do not end at sundown. Even in the evenings, families huddle together, talking themselves into circles. Your own household is no exception. After the evening meal, as shadows stretch and the lamp smokes, your eldest son insists that helping a neighbor is the highest form of goodness. Your daughter disagrees. It is more important not to harm anyone, she declares, arms folded with the stubbornness of someone newly converted to philosophy. Your wife rolls her eyes and mutters that doing the laundry ought to count for something. You find yourself drawn into these arguments, though you had promised yourself you would not. Something about the endless splitting of hairs is both aggravating and strangely addictive. In the past, you would have dozed off while others talked, dreaming of rain or easier times. Now, sleep is postponed while you argue over whether feeding a stray dog is a selfless act or simply a way to avoid guilt. Even the children are caught up in the fever. Instead of wrestling over toys, they now compete over whose deeds are the purest. I told the truth about the figs, boasts one. I did not even want the figs, shouts another, as if abstaining is more virtuous than honesty itself. They mimic the adults with alarming accuracy, their voices rising in shrill, earnest debate. Of course, some are less enthusiastic. The old stonemason shakes his head at the whole business. We used to argue about the harvest. Now we argue about the soul. Has the harvest improved? Has anyone's soul? He grumbles to anyone who will listen. Secretly, though, even he joins the debates in the bathhouse, carefully disguising his opinions as idle speculation. The priests, desperate to reclaim some authority, attempt to mediate these endless quarrels. They announce new days of fasting and extra prayers, hoping to distract the people with exhaustion and ritual. Yet even the prayers are now dissected, every word weighed for its sincerity, every gesture questioned. Some claim that fasting is an act of virtue only if done for the right reason. Others retort that even the wrong reason is better than no reason at all. Zarathustra himself appears at these gatherings, uninvited but impossible to ignore. He does not raise his voice, he simply listens, occasionally correcting a misunderstanding or pointing out that one cannot, in fact, choose both truth and lie, no matter how clever the argument. His calm presence infuriates some, reassures others, and unsettles nearly everyone. He never declares a winner in these debates. Instead, he repeats, every moment is a choice. Every choice matters. You wish sometimes that he would declare a few things unimportant, that he would absolve you from caring about every word, every action, every half formed intention. But he refuses to offer comfort. Even when he speaks of forgiveness, he insists it must be earned, not simply expected as a right. Your dreams, when they come, are now cluttered with words. You argue with your ancestors. You defend yourself against the judgment of neighbors, real and imagined. You wake, mouth dry, heart pounding, uncertain whether you won or lost. As the days pass, the arguments deepen. New factions form, each with its own version of Zarathustra's teachings. There are those who claim the path to light is found only in action. Others say the mind alone must be pure. Some argue that ritual is still important, if only as a reminder of the greater struggle. Still others insist that the only true faith is constant self questioning, a faith that feels suspiciously like perpetual doubt. No one agrees, but no one is bored either. For the first time in memory, life in Persia feels dangerous, not because of war or famine, but because every word might tip a balance, every silence might be a sin. You miss desperately the luxury of indifference. Yet beneath all the arguments, something else grows, a kind of community forged not in agreement, but in struggle. You realize, with a tired sort of gratitude, that you are not alone. Everyone is confused, everyone is anxious, everyone is, at last, awake, and no one knows if that is a blessing or a curse. As the moon rises and another day of debate gives way to uneasy sleep, you wonder what will come next. In Persia, even transformation arrives by degrees. But you cannot deny it now. The world is changing, and you are changing with it, one tedious, relentless argument at a time. It does not take long for the priests to realize that they have lost control of the conversation. In the old days, just a handful of weeks ago, though it feels like another lifetime, their authority was as solid and unquestionable as the hills themselves. Now, their carefully rehearsed rituals and mumbled prayers seem quaint, almost theatrical, compared to the relentless, exhausting seriousness with which every ordinary Persian now weighs questions of truth and darkness. You notice the change first in the temple. The stone floor, once polished by the nervous footsteps of the faithful, is almost empty. The incense smokes for no one, curling up toward the ceiling, searching in vain for attention. The priests continue to perform their duties, but you can see the strain. Their movements are slower, their voices less certain, and when they speak the old words, they glance sideways, as if expecting a challenge from some hidden philosopher lurking behind a pillar. Outside, the arguments rage on. People stand in groups, sometimes for hours, hashing out the meaning of the latest word from Zarathustra, or quibbling over the correct way to express devotion. Some are convinced that to be truly righteous, one must abandon all tradition. Others argue that only by keeping the rituals alive can you prove yourself vigilant in the war between light and darkness. No one seems to notice how little anyone agrees anymore. One afternoon, you pass by the old priests gathered at the shade of the fig tree, their robes rumpled, their faces lined with worry. He has made our knowledge obsolete, mutters one, picking at the hem of his sleeve. Another, more bitter, adds, they want us to decide, to choose, to think. They were content before. Who asked for all this responsibility? You are not unsympathetic. The priests were never bad men. Mostly they were bored men, diligent in their boredom, expert in the repetition of sacred gestures. Their comfort was that there were always answers, even if the answers were as bland as barley porridge. Now, the questions have multiplied and the answers have retreated to the shadows, leaving only endless, anxious searching. The old festivals are the first to suffer. You notice it during the moon feast, when only a few dozen people gather for the usual procession. Most linger at the edge, watching the rituals with polite detachment. When the priest invites the crowd to join the chant, their voices are thin, like a half forgotten tune. You wonder if anyone misses the old certainty, or if they are all simply pretending not to notice its absence. Later, in the market, you overhear a group of young men debating whether it is possible to be both a good Persian and a true follower of Zarathustra. Their tone is half serious, half mocking, but underneath it all is a real anxiety. My father says I must never abandon the ways of our ancestors, says one. But Zarathustra says tradition without understanding is just sleepwalking. So be a sleepwalker who thinks about waking up, laughs another, but the laughter dies quickly. The real trouble comes when people begin to blame the priests for everything that is difficult or confusing in the new order. A woman accuses the temple of failing to keep her son safe from fever. Your rituals have no power now, not since that man came. An old farmer scolds the head priest for a bad harvest, as if Zarathustra himself had dried up the clouds. The priests, once revered and ignored in equal measure, are now only resented. Desperate to remain relevant, the priests try to rebrand themselves as mediators and interpreters of Zarathustra's words. They hold new gatherings, inviting everyone to discuss what it really means to choose truth. These sessions quickly spiral into bickering, with each person demanding that the others admit their own failings first. The priests sit helpless, scribbling notes and sweating under their heavy robes. You find yourself oddly amused and a little guilty. After all, you never asked for all this change. No one did. But now that it is here, it is strangely satisfying to see those who were once untouchable forced to defend themselves, to answer for the rituals they once guarded so jealously. You wonder if, somewhere, Zarathustra is watching and smiling, not with triumph, but with the tired resignation of someone who knew all along that truth was bound to be unpopular. One evening, you encounter Zarathustra himself near the outskirts of the village. He is sitting on a rock, gazing at the fading sky, as plain and unremarkable as ever. You approach, unsure whether to bow, to speak, or to keep walking. He senses your uncertainty and nods, almost imperceptibly. You look troubled, he says. His voice is dry as old bread. You want to say that you are more than troubled, that you are exhausted by the arguing, the responsibility, the constant second guessing of your every word and action. Instead, you just nod. He smiles, but it is a weary smile. They are afraid, he says quietly. It is easier to follow than to choose. You want to ask if it will always be like this, if every day will be a test, every decision a burden. But Zarathustra does not offer easy comfort. Truth is not a festival, he tells you. It is not a fire to be worshipped from a safe distance. It is a path, sometimes a lonely one. You leave him there, feeling only slightly better and considerably more tired. The arguments continue long into the night, echoing through empty streets and smoky kitchens. Some still cling to the old ways, desperate for a return to certainty. Others dive headlong into the new, eager to prove themselves worthy. Most, like you, are caught in between, uncertain, overwhelmed, and in spite of everything, strangely awake. As you drift into another restless sleep, you realize you have learned something the priests never taught, that doubt, in its own tedious way, is a kind of devotion, and that, for better or worse, you are now part of a story whose ending no priest can predict. You never expected to become obsessed with cleanliness, but here you are, sweeping the same patch of floor 3 times in one morning, all because Zarathustra once said, in that irritatingly calm way of his, that purity matters not only in the soul, but in the body, in thoughts, in actions, and, apparently, in the state of your doorstep. Now you notice it everywhere. Women scold their children not only for muddy feet, but for muddy words. Speak as if the wise Lord is listening. Your neighbor's wife snaps at her son, who had only muttered something about the neighbor's goat. The marketplace, which once was a cheerful muddle of dust, stray dogs, and casual insults, now resembles a battlefield against disorder. Everyone's busy with new habits, washing hands, sweeping walkways, and lecturing each other on the importance of purity as if it is a matter of cosmic urgency. The priests, in an uncharacteristic attempt at adaptation, start weaving the language of cleanliness into their sermons. Purity of the heart and hearth, drones the high priest, brings you closer to the light. But nobody is fooled. The words are not his, and the people know it. You catch him later, furiously brushing cobwebs from the temple pillars, muttering about keeping up appearances while looking over his shoulder, perhaps hoping Zarathustra will notice the effort. Even the lazy dogs are affected. The butcher's hound, who once snoozed undisturbed beneath the sun, is now shooed away from doorways and scolded for tracking dust onto sacred stones. Children play at purification, chasing each other with wet rags, arguing over which stains are acceptable and which are marks of the enemy. You realize, with a sigh, that every part of your day has become a ritual of scrutiny. The water for washing must be fresh, the pots unchipped, the bread baked with clean hands. You never used to care if a little grit ended up in your stew. Everyone ate the same dirt in the end. But now each grain is a symbol. Is it just superstition, you wonder? Or is this new obsession truly spiritual? You are not sure, but you dare not slacken, lest your neighbor or your own family accuse you of siding, even briefly, with the darkness. At first, there is grumbling. In my father's day, the potter complains, a little mud on your feet was the mark of honest work. His wife, not missing a beat, snaps back, and in your father's day, the goat slept in the house. Nobody wants to go back to that. But after a while, people begin to take a kind of pride in the new cleanliness. You see neighbors inspecting each other's doorways, comparing swept thresholds and sparkling pots. Gossip changes its focus. Instead of who is cheating at the scales, the market women whisper about who is letting dust gather under their tables. If the wise lord were to visit, says the baker's daughter, would he find cobwebs in your rafters? The debates become even more elaborate. Some argue that purity is an inward state, that all the scrubbing in the world is worthless if your heart is unclean. Others insist that outward cleanliness is the best way to practice vigilance, that dust is the first sign of moral decay. A few, unwilling to be outdone, insist that true piety requires both spotless hands and spotless intentions, as if a perfectly clean life could be achieved by sheer force of will. Zarathustra himself is little help. When asked, he only smiles that weary smile and says, "Order is the friend of truth. Let it begin where you live." He will not say more, and so you are left with your questions and your broom. You remember when not long ago, the only cleaning that mattered was before festivals, when a quick sweep and a splash of water were enough to satisfy both the ancestors and the neighbors. Now, every day is a festival of anxiety. You catch yourself wondering what would happen if you simply let the dust settle for a week. Would anyone notice? Would you be judged? Would you judge yourself? Of course, this new seriousness about order and purity does not end with houses and hands. People start to police each other's language, correcting not only lies, but careless or thoughtless words. Your friend is publicly chided for exaggerating the size of his last melon. Is this the truth or just a bigger melon in your mind? Someone asks, and everyone laughs, but the laughter is uneasy. You begin to understand that in Zarathustra's new world, there is no escape from scrutiny. Even your thoughts, if they could be read, would need to be swept clean, ordered, and presented for inspection. At times, you wish for the old sloppiness, the comfort of a little chaos, the freedom to let things slide. But there is also, you must admit, a strange satisfaction in the new order. The village looks brighter, the market smells fresher, the children are healthier, even if they are more insufferable. The old complaints about filth, about disease, about carelessness lose their sting. Instead, there are new complaints, of course, but at least these feel important. At night, as you lie awake, hands still smelling of soap, You wonder how long this new vigilance can last. Is purity just another form of boredom, dressed in white and scrubbed raw? Or is there something noble in all this fussing, something that lifts you, if only a little, above the mud and dust of ordinary life? You do not know, but you do know this: tomorrow morning you will sweep your doorstep again, not because you expect Zarathustra to walk by, but because someone will notice if you do not. And in Persia, that is almost the same thing. By now, even the smallest spark draws attention. The ordinary fires that once flickered quietly in the corners of homes and market stalls have become objects of suspicion, respect, and endless debate. Where once you tossed a broken twig onto the hearth without thinking, now you pause, weighing the gesture, remembering Zarathustra's teaching. Fire is sacred. Fire is truth. Fire is a test. You first notice the shift on a chilly morning when the baker's apprentice hesitates before lighting the oven. He stands there, matches in hand, staring at the unlit wood as if he expects it to judge him. Finally, he mutters a hurried prayer, not one of the old ones, but a new, awkward collection of words about choosing light over darkness. When the fire finally catches, the crowd lets out a breath it did not know it was holding. Soon, every flame in the village is watched more carefully than the market scales. No one lets a candle gutter. No one leaves a lamp unattended. At night, you see people checking, double checking, fussing over embers with the anxious air of someone performing heart surgery. The blacksmith refuses to use the old cracked bellows. I will not tempt Angra Mainyu, he insists, and the others nod, though they do not know exactly what he means. The priests, desperate to reclaim their fading relevance, suddenly discover an ancient fondness for fire. They rededicate the temple's eternal flame, inviting the entire village to witness a ceremony that takes twice as long as before and is half as inspiring. Everyone listens, fidgeting, as the high priest recites a list of rules for tending sacred fires. You suspect he is inventing some as he goes along, but nobody dares interrupt. Yet, even here, in the glow of supposedly holy light, the arguments persist. Is it enough to tend the fire with clean hands, or must one also have a clean heart? Does the fire care if you are thinking dark thoughts while you sweep the ashes? The answers change depending on who is speaking, and every answer brings another round of debate. In your own home, the fire becomes a source of low level panic. Your wife polices the hearth, scolding the children for tossing food scraps onto the coals. The fire sees what you feed it, she warns. Your youngest, cleverer than his years, asks, does it see what I am thinking too? Nobody laughs. You begin to wonder if your family is the only one that talks to the fire as if it is listening. People invent new rituals. The butcher's family, notorious for their laziness, suddenly insists on washing, before every meal, not just themselves, but the firewood, the cooking pots, even the matches. The potter, who never cared for sermons, now mutters a blessing each time he lights his kiln, then watches the flames as if they might offer advice about glaze. It is not just fear that motivates them. There is a sense, however fragile, that the fire is no longer just an ordinary thing, but a kind of companion, or perhaps a witness. Neighbors begin to compete over whose hearth burns brightest, whose flames are most orderly, whose home is most free from ashes. You overhear two old women comparing lamp oils with the intensity of generals reviewing troops. Some find comfort in these rituals. When I tend the fire, says your neighbor, I feel I am part of something larger, that my small actions matter, that I am pushing back the darkness, if only a little. Others are less convinced. The old goatherd grumbles, "If fire cares so much, why did it burn down my shed?" No one has an answer, though a few mutter that he probably deserved it for some hidden failing. Zarathustra, predictably, refuses to give rules or blessings. When pressed, he only says, "Fire is truth. Treat it as you would treat your own heart." This is, of course, no help at all. You spend the next week worrying that your heart is as untidy as the ashes under your grate. It is not just the village that changes. News spreads of distant settlements where people have built great new hearths, where firekeepers are chosen for their supposed purity, where some have begun to see the flames as messengers of the wise Lord himself. Stories drift in of miracles and disasters, all blamed on how a particular fire was tended, how pure it burned, how clean the hands that fed it. At times, the anxiety becomes comical. The old merchant's wife, once famous for her cynicism, is now spotted weeping over a smoky lamp, convinced it is a sign that she harbors secret darkness. "I have confessed everything," she cries, "even the time I lied about the figs." The neighbors listen sympathetically, but one cannot help but wonder if they, too, are rehearsing secret confessions, just in case. Yet, amid all this nervous piety, there is also a new warmth in the village. The hearths burn brighter, homes are cleaner, people gather at night to share warmth and stories. The old darkness, the kind born of neglect, carelessness, and habit, recedes, if only for a while. Children listen, wide eyed, as elders tell tales of the first fires, of days when light was rare and precious. You find yourself missing the days when fire was just fire, but you also find a strange comfort in the knowledge that every flame now stands for something more. In the endless argument between light and darkness, every small act, even the careful tending of a kitchen fire, is a declaration. Before bed, you add a few fresh twigs to your hearth and watch the flames rise. For a moment, you think of Zarathustra and wonder if he knew, when he spoke those simple words, how many lives would be upended by the slow, flickering dance of truth. You doubt he did. You doubt anyone could. Still, as you turn away, you feel not peace exactly, but the tired satisfaction of someone who has done what they could and will do it again tomorrow. It is astonishing how quickly old gods can fade when people begin to worry about dust and fire. For generations, The village lived under the watchful eyes of countless deities. The god of the grain, who supposedly determined every harvest. The goddess of wells, who required a coin or two for every safe drink. The spirits of hills and crossroads and wines each owed a different prayer or a carefully selected pebble. Now, their names are spoken less and less, replaced by a new language that is both simpler and somehow much more complicated. You first notice this shift during a storm. The wind howls around your house, shaking loose a dozen half remembered superstitions. Normally, someone would dash to the nearest shrine and make a small offering, a bowl of milk for the wind, a whisper to the spirit of the sky. This time, no one bothers. Instead, your wife stands by the window, muttering Zarathustra's words: order against chaos, light against darkness. She stares into the storm, as if waiting to see which will win. The children, too, have picked up the new script. When lightning cracks, they no longer run to the family altar, no longer shout the names of forgotten sky gods. Instead, they look to you and ask if fire is always light, or if sometimes it can be darkness. You do not know how to answer. The old answers would have been easy. Pray to the storm god and wait. Now, every question is a kind of test, and every answer feels like a responsibility. The old priests walk the streets with tired faces, clutching their staffs as if for balance. They still perform the rituals, but it is clear their hearts are no longer in it, nor are the hearts of their congregations. People attend out of habit or politeness, eyes glazed, thinking instead about the state of their souls, about the purity of their actions, about whether they have chosen light or darkness since breakfast. One day, you pass the shrine of the household gods. The offering bowl is empty. Dust has settled on the idol's shoulders, undisturbed. You pause, feeling an odd pang, not of guilt, but of nostalgia for a time when the world's problems could be solved by leaving a few raisins or reciting a chant. Now, even the simplest decisions seem fraught with consequence. The arguments, of course, never stop. Some insist that the old gods are not gone, only changed. Perhaps they are aspects of Ahura Mazda or Angra Mainyu, the weaver speculates, sounding almost hopeful. Others are less philosophical. If they mattered, the butcher snorts, they would have stopped Zarathustra. Nobody quite laughs, but nobody disagrees. And then there are the silent ones, those who say nothing, who simply let the old names fade, who sweep the altars and clear away the offerings as if tidying up after a long, awkward visit from distant relatives. You wonder if you are becoming one of them. The festivals become stranger, half remembered, hollowed out. During the spring planting, only a handful gather to sing the old songs. The melodies linger for a verse or two, then dissolve into awkward silence. Someone tries to lead a prayer to the goddess of rain, but the words come out wrong, the cadence lost. Finally, an elder shrugs and mutters one of Zarathustra's new blessings, and the others, relieved, join in. The marketplace changes as well. Superstitions about lucky days and forbidden colors lose their power. People make choices based not on omens or dreams, but on whether an act feels right, or at least less wrong. You see your neighbor buy a new donkey on what everyone used to call an unlucky day, and when asked, he shrugs. There is no luck, only the struggle to choose well. This is the kind of philosophy that would have bored you to tears a month ago, but now it sounds almost reasonable. Of course, the transition is not smooth. There are quarrels, old habits clashing with new convictions. An old woman scolds her daughter for forgetting to pour out water for the kitchen spirit. The daughter replies, "There are no spirits, only choices." The words hang in the air, cold and final. That night, the two do not speak, each privately mourning a world that seems to have disappeared between one sunrise and the next. Zarathustra is nowhere to be seen, but his absence makes him loom larger than ever. His words are repeated and reinterpreted by everyone, by those who are eager to let go of the old ways, by those who wish to combine the old and the new, and by those who miss the days when nobody expected them to think so much. You begin to suspect that Zarathustra would be amused by this, or perhaps simply resigned. In time, you realize what the greatest loss is: the ability to hide behind tradition. In the old world, when things went wrong, there was always a god to blame, always a ritual that could be performed, a scapegoat that could be found. Now you are left with yourself and your choices, for better or for worse. One night, after another long day of arguments and small decisions, you find yourself standing in front of the abandoned shrine. The dust is thick, the silence is deep. For a moment, you are tempted to leave a token, to say a prayer, to pretend that the old certainties can be revived. Instead, you turn away, muttering Zarathustra's name under your breath, half as a curse, half as a blessing. Behind you, the wind rustles, indifferent. The old gods are quiet, their shrines untended. The new struggle continues, more personal, more relentless, and somehow more lonely. But at least you tell yourself as you trudge home, you will never be bored again. Tired, yes. Confused, absolutely. But boredom, it seems, has finally been banished, swept away by the endless, exhausting need to choose. Time begins to split itself in two: the time before Zarathustra and the time after. Nobody says this aloud, but you feel it everywhere. A quiet fracture running through every memory, every conversation. The past now seems not only boring, but strangely innocent, almost childish. A world where one could go through the motions, mutter a prayer, forget to sweep, and still expect the sun to rise as usual. The present is denser, heavier, the days packed with decisions, with invisible weights. Old festivals become sites of the split. At the autumn gathering, you notice people arriving late, hesitating at the temple steps. Some clutch their offerings tightly, while others stand apart, empty handed and uneasy. The usual songs sound less like music and more like questions. Who are these for? Which side are we on now? The priests do their best, their voices wavering with a note of desperation as they recite the ancient blessings. But the crowd is thinner, distracted, their attention divided between the rituals and their own private calculations. Am I sincere? Am I doing this out of habit or out of fear? Does the wise Lord care about my stale loaf of bread? Does anger mine you count it against me if I am only here because I do not want my neighbors to talk? Afterward, as the dusk gathers, people linger in small clusters, comparing new customs with old. My grandmother used to say the harvest was the work of 30 different gods. One man murmurs, fingering the rough edge of a barley cake. His friend shrugs. Now we say it is the work of choices, too many choices. Children, once the loudest and most chaotic part of these gatherings, have grown quieter, more watchful. They listen to the adults argue about whose customs to keep, whose to discard. The games have changed too. Instead of chasing each other with sticks and mud, they stage mock debates, pretending to be Zarathustra or the priests, accusing each other of failing to choose the light. You overhear your daughter scolding her brother. You let the darkness in when you lied about the pomegranate. The elders, for the most part, sit to one side, grumbling about lost traditions, but even their grumbling is half hearted. In the past, a festival was an excuse to forget the daily grind, to eat too much and dance badly. Now, every event is a battleground for meaning. People take sides over the smallest details: how to bake the ceremonial bread, which prayer to recite, whether to sweep the altar clockwise or counterclockwise. There is a nostalgia in the air, but also something sharper, almost like relief. The old ways were comfortable, but they left no room for doubt or hope, just repetition, year after year. Now, even in their anxiety, people feel a flicker of agency. When someone asks, "Who will lead the next prayer?" no one steps forward automatically. Instead, there is a moment of genuine consideration, a searching glance, as if waiting for a sign. Sometimes, no one steps forward at all. You find yourself longing, occasionally, for the mindless obedience of the past. It was easier to follow, to hide in the crowd. Now every gesture feels watched, every word a declaration. You worry about your motives for everything. Is this kindness or just the desire to appear good? Is this fear or faith or something less noble? In the market, the merchants have adapted. The old talismans, ribbons, carved stones, feathers are less popular now. Instead, you hear men and women boasting not about which god they pleased last season, but about which difficult choice they made. I returned the missing coin to the blacksmith, even though no one would have known, says one, waiting for approval. I told my wife the truth about the burnt bread, brags another, though his wife looks unimpressed. The conversation never settles. Some insist on inventing new festivals, new rituals of choice and confession, while others dig in their heels, determined to keep at least a few old traditions alive. The result is a confusing patchwork of observances, half remembered half invented, all performed with an odd mixture of anxiety and pride. One night, at a hastily arranged feast of choices, you see a young woman stand and declare her intention to forgive her neighbor for last year's insult. The room goes silent. In the past, such things were left to the gods or the slow decay of memory. Now, forgiveness is an act, a conscious step toward the light. People nod solemnly, though a few mutter that it was a minor insult, hardly worth so much attention. But you see that the gesture matters, not for its drama, but for its deliberateness. As the months slip by, the line between before and after grows sharper. The old festivals are not forgotten, but they are no longer a refuge. Now, every celebration is haunted by the question, what do we really believe? What are we trying to become? Sometimes, late at night, you remember the simple pleasures of the past, the taste of honey cakes, the relief of a well executed ritual, the comfort of doing what your parents did. Now, everything is uncertain, provisional, debated. But there is something else, too, a sense that at last the future is open, however frightening that might be. As you drift into sleep, you think, maybe this is what growing up feels like for a person, for a village, for a whole world. And maybe that is why nobody really wants to go back. You would think that by now, with so much talk of light and darkness, good and evil, people might finally tire of listening to one another. But the opposite happens. A new breed emerges among your neighbors, and you can spot them easily. The wise boors, the philosophers of the marketplace, the self appointed guardians of every single word that ever fell from Zarathustra's lips. They speak slowly and often, as if their voices alone could bring order to a world that keeps slipping into confusion. You first encounter one of them at the well. The sun is barely up, but a man you only know as the reciter is already there, surrounded by two unlucky souls who made the mistake of asking him a question. He answers with the measured patience of someone who believes he has solved every problem, but is too polite to say so. Truth is like water, he says, gazing meaningfully at the bucket. If you carry it carelessly, you will spill more than you keep. The others nod, though you can see their eyes glazing over. He continues, Zarathustra teaches that the well is both a gift and a responsibility. We must draw carefully. We must not waste. The lesson, as with most of his lessons, seems obvious to the point of uselessness, but he goes on until the women are ready to let the goats drink first, just to escape. It is not only men, of course. The baker's eldest daughter, who once spent her afternoons braiding her sister's hair, now lectures anyone within earshot about the threefold path. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. You cannot have one without the others, she proclaims, tapping her wooden spoon for emphasis. If you think good thoughts but speak ill, it is as if you have soiled clean linen with dirty hands. Her mother listens with the resigned patience of one who knows the kitchen is now a temple, the bread a sacrament, and the spoon a scepter. These wise boors are everywhere. They appear at every gathering, every argument, every awkward silence. They are the first to raise their hands when someone hesitates over the right prayer, the first to correct the young when they confuse Ahura Mazda with one of the old gods. They quote Zarathustra with alarming accuracy, adding commentary of their own invention until no one is sure where the prophet ends and the bore begins. Some are gentle, content to explain. Others are less forgiving. The cobbler, who once cared for nothing but sandals, now scolds his neighbors for carelessness in word and deed. You walk as if you are alone in the world, he tells a young boy who tramples a line of ants. Zarathustra says we are never alone. Our choices echo in the world. The boy stares at his feet, and the cobbler beams, as if single handedly pulling the world a little further into the light. The old priests, seeing their own authority shrinking, sometimes try to join this new class of moralists. They memorize Zarathustra's sayings, sprinkle them liberally into sermons, and even hold public competitions to see who can recite the longest passage without error. The prize is usually a small loaf of barley bread, but the true reward is the right to speak first at the next festival. The competition is fierce, the audience bored, but no one dares laugh. Not everyone is impressed. The stonemason, whose hands are too cracked and busy for philosophy, complains to you. They talk so much about good words, but the wall still leaks when it rains. His wife, less charitable, says, if words could build houses, we would all live in palaces by now. Yet, despite the eye rolling and the sighs, you see that these wise bores serve a purpose. In the confusion left by the fading old ways, people crave certainty. Even the most tedious recitation is better than the silent terror of not knowing what is right or wrong. A neighbor who once greeted you with gossip about chickens now greets you with a quote. As Zarathustra says, truth is the strongest shield. It is tiresome, yes, but also strangely comforting. Children take to the new order with enthusiasm and cruelty. They test each other with questions. What did Zarathustra say about sharing? What is the punishment for idle words? Those who falter are mocked or sent to the back of the line. The clever ones memorize every saying, and you see them practicing at night, lips moving silently as they repeat the prophet's words like incantations. Arguments in the market last twice as long as before, with every dispute ending in a chorus of quotations, each side sure that Zarathustra is on theirs. The truth is, no one is quite sure what the prophet actually meant half the time, but the mere act of repeating his words seems to carry its own authority. The air is thick with borrowed wisdom. At times, you find yourself longing for a little ignorance. Was it not easier when people only argued about grain prices or which goat was the laziest? Now, every conversation risks turning into a sermon. Every joke must be weighed against the possibility of offense. Every greeting might be an invitation to a debate you did not ask for. You are not immune. More than once, you catch yourself quoting Zarathustra, sometimes just to end a conversation. The words come easily, almost like a prayer, a way to signal that you too are trying your best. And perhaps you are. At night, the village is quieter, the children tired from moral competitions, the adults exhausted from endless vigilance. But as you listen to the wise boars recite their favorite lines one last time before bed, you realize something has changed. People are thinking, if only to prepare for the next argument. Thought itself, once a rare and dangerous act, is now woven into daily life, as necessary and persistent as sweeping the hearth or tending the fire. It was in its way a kind of progress, a tedious, circular, exhausting progress, led by those who cannot bear to let a single word go unexamined, a single deed go unjudged. And you, like everyone else, listen, sigh, and wonder what Zarathustra would say if he could see what you have all become. You did not think that boredom could become more complicated, but you were wrong. Once, sin was a simple matter, breaking a rule, failing a ritual, or angering the wrong god on the wrong day. Guilt was as straightforward as burnt bread. Now, under the ever watchful eyes of Zarathustra's wisdom, sin has become a labyrinth of subtle missteps and invisible stains. Every act, every word, every intention is suspect, and the village is drowning in a sea of tiny, tedious moral dilemmas. You notice it first at breakfast when your wife asks if you truly like her bread or are just being polite. In the old days, you would have nodded, muttered a blessing to the kitchen spirit, and moved on. Now you pause, considering whether honesty or kindness is the greater good. I like it, you say finally, but the doubt lingers all morning. Was that a pure thought, or have you betrayed the light by omitting that the crust is a little too thick? It is everywhere. The children, who once argued over toys and scraps, now fight over whose virtues are more sincere. I meant it when I helped you, your son insists. You only did it because you wanted mother to see, his sister retorts, and the argument spirals into a contest of intentions that leaves both in tears. You watch, half amused, half exhausted. Zarathustra has made them philosophers and accusers before they can tie their sandals. In the market, the same transformation is visible. The merchant used to worry only about being caught with a crooked scale. Now, he sweats over whether he has even thought about cheating. When a customer questions his price, he protests not just his honesty, but the purity of his motives. May Ahura Mazda judge me if my heart is not true, he declares. No one quite believes him, and he does not look convinced himself. Gossip has adapted too. Where neighbors once whispered about infidelity or laziness, now they dissect each other's intentions with the sharpness of knives. Did you see how quickly the potter offered help? Too quickly, if you ask me, almost as if he wanted everyone to notice. And what about the shepherd? Always talking about truth, but I saw him give his wife the best portion of lamb. Pride, I say. Pride disguised as generosity. You find yourself drawn in, unwillingly, afraid not just of being judged, but of failing to judge yourself with equal severity. The worst, perhaps, is the new breed of confessions. Once, people confessed to the priest before major festivals, listing sins in a ritual monotone. Now, confessions are daily and never ending, a running commentary on the failures of thought and deed. Your neighbor corners you on the way to the well. I lied about being sick to avoid helping at the fire, she admits, eyes wide and desperate. Do you think that's worse than thinking about lying but not actually doing it? You have no answer, and neither does anyone else. The question hangs between you like the smell of last week's fish. Rituals have not disappeared, but they have become opportunities for introspection and anxiety. When you sweep the hearth, you remember Zarathustra's warning that purity must be inward as well as outward. When you give alms, you ask yourself whether you truly care about the poor or simply wish to be seen as caring. Even silence is suspect. Is it wisdom or cowardice? You begin to miss the certainty of mindless obedience, the old belief that ticking off the right boxes would save you from misfortune. You hear it in the new prayers, which are less requests for blessings and more pleas for clarity. Help me choose rightly, O wise Lord, and forgive me when I choose for the wrong reasons, you mutter, unsure if anyone, divine or otherwise, is listening. Of course, the wise boars do not help. They quote Zarathustra at every opportunity, spinning his words into ever more elaborate webs of moral obligation. Even a kind word spoken for the wrong reason is a lie, intones the reciter. The path to light is narrow, and every step must be watched. The rest of you nod, then return home to spend an hour debating whether you nodded because you agreed or because you wanted the reciter to stop talking. Social life suffers. Feasts are shorter, jokes are rare, laughter is often cut off by an anxious look. Nobody wants to be accused of mocking righteousness, or worse, of enjoying themselves in the wrong way. Even the children, who used to race and shout, now cluster in quiet groups, inventing games where the winner is whoever confesses the smallest sin. Sometimes you wonder if anyone is truly happy. The energy that once went into festivals and gossip is now spent on self examination, on sifting through memories for traces of hidden vice. You lie awake at night, replaying the day in your mind. Did you help the neighbor with her roof because you are kind, or because you owe her brother money? Did you forgive your friend's harsh words because you are noble, or just because you were too tired to argue? Yet, for all its burdens, the new way has brought a strange, grim intimacy. People are more honest, if only about their doubts. Neighbors look you in the eye, searching for truth, and you do the same. You feel both exposed and seen, both isolated and connected in a way you never were before. If only virtue were less exhausting, you think. If only the struggle between light and darkness were not so much like arguing with yourself in the mirror, day after day, for all the world to see. You suspect this is exactly what Zarathustra intended, not a village of saints, but a village of people who cannot stop asking themselves hard questions, a new kind of boredom, heavier and more demanding than any you knew before. By now, even death itself has become complicated. Once, it was a simple fact of life, as unavoidable and unremarkable as dust. People died, and the village gathered. The proper rituals were performed, offerings burned, and a few well worn prayers were recited. The afterlife was a vague region somewhere beyond the mountains, filled with shadows and familiar faces, managed by the same jaded gods who managed everything else. But Zarathustra, in his quietly relentless way, has managed to complicate even the end. Now, every funeral is a miniature symposium, a slow motion drama where every sigh, every tear, every carefully chosen word is weighed and interpreted for hidden meaning. The old certainty that the dead would simply join their ancestors is gone, replaced by anxious speculation. Where do they go? Did they choose well enough? Was every good deed sincere, every lie repented? And if not, what then? You attend your first Zarathustrian funeral on a day so bright and dry, it feels almost disrespectful. The deceased is an old neighbor, a man known mainly for his enthusiasm for apricots and his lifelong habit of falling asleep during festivals. In the old days, the priests would have chanted the required prayers, and everyone would have gone home, quietly relieved that it was not their turn. Now, the ceremony is longer and much less certain. The wise boars take turns reciting Zarathustra's sayings about judgment, truth, and the necessity of a clean heart. The priest, increasingly sidelined, tries to insert a few old prayers, but they are met with polite, distracted silence. Instead, everyone is invited to share their memories of the deceased, not just the funny ones, but the honest ones, and that proves a risky business. A neighbor stands up and confesses. He once borrowed my wheelbarrow and returned it muddy, but he also shared his apricots when my son was ill. I do not know which weighs more. Someone else adds, he always listened, even if he was only half awake. A third says, he lied about the taxes last year, but he helped rebuild the bridge. There are no easy judgments, only a patchwork of virtues and flaws, each examined in the dry light of collective honesty. The priest, cornered, tries to sum up the man's life in the old way. He did his duty. He honored the gods. He leaves behind a good name. But the crowd is restless. Someone mutters, but did he choose the light? Someone else replies, he did his best. That is all that any of us can do. The words hang in the air, unsatisfying and unanswerable. The talk inevitably turns to what comes after. In the old stories, souls drifted across a shadowy river, welcomed by ancestors and soothed by gentle spirits. Now, Zarathustra's words introduce a new kind of unease. The soul must answer for its choices. There is no comfort in ritual, no automatic ticket to peace. The afterlife is not a place of vague rest, but a reckoning, and nobody knows exactly what that means. You walk home with the others, listening as they debate in low voices. Do you think he made it to the light? Did he repent enough? What about the time he cheated at dice? The questions multiply, and there are no answers, only opinions. half remembered quotations, and the nagging fear that everyone, someday, will be called to the same uncertain accounting. At home, you find yourself reviewing your own life as if it were an endless list of unresolved debts. You recall small betrayals, half hearted kindnesses, the times you chose comfort over honesty or silence over courage. For the first time, you wonder if your life will be debated like this, if those left behind will judge your choices and weigh them against one another, unsure what scale to use. Even the children are not immune. You overhear them whispering about the afterlife. If you lie, will you wander forever in darkness? What if you do not know you are lying? Does the wise Lord forgive mistakes? Their play has changed. Where once they played at being kings and queens, now they play at being judges and confessors, weighing imaginary sins and handing out forgiveness or punishment with a seriousness that is both comic and unsettling. The new anxiety seeps into daily life. Neighbors keep lists of good deeds and confessions, hoping to balance their scales before the end. The wise boars organize weekly gatherings for mutual encouragement, which mostly means reciting the latest interpretations of Zarathustra's teachings and debating the finer points of repentance. The old certainty that at least death was simple is gone. And yet, you sense that not at all is lost. In the cracks of fear and doubt, something else grows. There are moments of real forgiveness, small acts of kindness given without hope of reward. At the next funeral, a woman stands up and simply says, "He was kind to me when I needed it." No one argues. For a moment, everyone is quiet, and in that silence, you feel a kind of peace, thin, tentative, but real. That night, as you stare at the ceiling, you wonder what Zarathustra would say about your life. Would he see your choices as enough? Would he forgive your doubts, your petty failures? You do not know. But you find a certain grim comfort in the knowledge that, for once, everyone is asking the same questions, haunted by the same uncertainty. In the end, you suspect, the greatest change is not in what happens after death, but in how people try to live before it, not with perfect confidence, but with restless honesty, always measuring, always uncertain, always searching for the light in the darkness. Building anything in Persia is an act of patience, if not outright stubbornness, and nothing tests the nerves of a community quite like the construction of a temple. The old shrines were modest affairs, little more than piles of stones and smoke blackened idols, each one sprouting stories of minor miracles and mostly forgotten family curses. But now, under the influence of Zarathustra's teachings, the village is determined to raise a fire temple, a true house of light, where the sacred fire can burn without the embarrassment of sharing space with damp wood, sleeping dogs, or leftover soup. You, like everyone else, are drafted into service. The elders organize a council to plan every stone, every beam, every insignificant decorative detail. Naturally, nothing can be agreed upon. Is it more pious to use local mud bricks, as your ancestors did, or to import smooth stones from upriver as the neighboring settlement recently boasted about. Which direction should the door face? Toward the rising sun, or perhaps away from the dust laden wind? Every meeting lasts twice as long as expected and solves half as much. Debates break out over the nature of purity. The wise boars declare that every stone must be cleansed in running water before it can join the sacred walls. The stonemason, who remembers when half the houses fell down after a rainstorm, protests, "A stone is a stone. If it can keep out the cold, it is pure enough for me." His protests are overruled, and so the children spend days scrubbing rocks in the river while the adults stand by, solemn and self important. The real chaos begins when it is time to set the foundation. Everyone wants to be the one whose stone is chosen first, as if a favorable place in the wall will guarantee a favorable place in the afterlife. Arguments flare. Promises are made and broken. Old grudges reemerge. You hear a neighbor mutter, "If building a temple brings this much trouble, what hope is there for the rest of us?" His wife answers, "At least we are not bored." It is the closest thing to agreement you have heard all week. Once the first stones are finally set, the next problem emerges. Who will tend the fire? In the old days, the role rotated, and the worst that could happen was a burnt dinner or a forgotten prayer. Now, the firekeeper must be chosen for their purity, their devotion, and, most difficult of all, their reputation among neighbors. Weeks are spent watching, gossiping, compiling lists of small virtues and larger sins. The final choice falls on a woman whose main qualification, everyone agrees, is that nobody can remember her ever offending anyone. She looks terrified, but accepts with the resignation of someone who knows that, in Persia, you do not choose responsibility. Responsibility chooses you. The first lighting of the sacred fire is a spectacle, equal parts awe and awkwardness. The priests, suddenly eager for a place at the center of things, parade in with old robes, hurriedly patched, and new prayers half memorized. The wise boars declaim the necessity of clean thoughts as well as clean hands. Children are shushed. The crowd holds its breath as the fire flares up, and for a moment, you feel that something really is different, that perhaps all this work and worry has not been in vain. But even here, the arguments are never far away. Within a week, complaints arise. The smoke is too thick. The firekeeper's shoes are not clean enough. The new rules about who may approach the flame seem to change daily. People debate whether the fire should be visible from the street or kept hidden, whether the daily offerings must be prepared with water from the east well, or if the west well is acceptable in a pinch. Some insist that the entire village must attend each sunrise ritual, while others grumble that even the wise lord cannot expect so much devotion before breakfast. The most persistent complaint is that every decision about the temple, every brick, every rule, every minor gesture must be discussed, examined, and justified in the light of Zarathustra's teachings. There are no small decisions anymore, only endless opportunities for self doubt and community argument. Yet, Amid the confusion, something remarkable happens. The act of building together, of arguing and worrying and finally compromising, begins to draw people closer than the old festivals ever did. The work is slow, exhausting, and full of disappointment, but it is shared. Neighbors who barely spoke before now quarrel openly and, just as often, share a laugh at the absurdity of their latest disagreement. You find yourself caring, in spite of yourself, about whether the temple walls are straight or whether the fire burns brightly, not because you fear divine wrath, but because it matters to the people around you. On the day the temple is declared complete, the village gathers to watch the firekeeper perform her first evening ritual. The sun sets in a blaze of orange, the crowd falls silent, and the newly lit flame flickers, hesitant, as if testing the mood. There are prayers, speeches, a few stifled yawns. Then, as darkness settles, you feel an unfamiliar warmth, not from the fire, but from the sense of having built something together, however flawed. Walking home, you realize that the temple's true foundation is not the carefully cleansed stones, but the slow, frustrating, relentless effort of 100 different hands and 1,000 small decisions. The wise Lord, you suspect, cares less for the purity of the altar than for the honesty of those who built it. You go to bed that night exhausted, but strangely at peace, wondering if perhaps Zarathustra knew what he was doing after all. Boredom is banished, replaced by a kind of community you never expected to find. A community forged in the fires of argument, doubt, and finally, cooperation. In the weeks following the temple's completion, you begin to notice a subtle but insistent change in the way people speak. The old tongue of the village, once so economical and direct, now creaks under the weight of new words and newly invented phrases. It is as if language itself is being rebuilt, stone by stone, to accommodate the shape of Zarathustra's teachings. You first notice it at the market, where once bargains were struck with quick, sly exchanges. That melon's too soft. The scales are wrong. You're robbing me blind. Now each deal takes twice as long, padded with ponderous qualifications. As Zarathustra teaches, truth in trade is the light of the community, says the grocer, drawing out each word as if revealing a secret. The customer responds, and as he says, intent is as important as action, so I trust that this melon is both sweet and sincerely offered. You sigh, longing for the days when a firm squeeze and a quick insult sufficed. The changes are everywhere. The old short prayers. May the gods watch. Peace upon your house. May your sheep be fat, are quietly retired, replaced by elaborate invocations. May Ahura Mazda guide your thoughts toward the good, your tongue toward the true, and your hand toward the just. People now recite, stumbling over the unfamiliar syllables. If anyone misses the old brevity, they do not say so. The new words seem to multiply daily. Children at play invent tongue-twisting rhymes about purity of purpose and clarity of conscience. The wise boors have adopted the habit of quoting Zarathustra at such length that it sometimes takes a full morning to say hello. The priests, always eager to regain lost ground, issue new instructions for prayers and blessings, each more verbose than the last. You receive an official scroll on how to greet a neighbor in accordance with the path of light, and by the time you finish reading, your neighbor is already gone. Some villagers embrace the change, relishing the way their speech now sounds important, even profound. The baker, whose vocabulary was once limited to weights and flour, now flourishes phrases like the sanctity of sustenance and bread as a vessel for virtue. He delivers his loaves with little sermons, and the customers listen, part amused, part wary, as if bread itself might demand confession before eating. Others struggle. The old stonemason mutters, the more words they invent, the less sense they make, and you sympathize. Simple requests: pass the salt, help with the roof, shut the door, are now dressed in new garb. If it be your good intention, may you aid me in upholding the order of our dwelling by closing the portal in the spirit of unity. The door, as usual, remains open. Still, you cannot deny a certain pride in this new vocabulary. Words like truth, order, light, and choice have become part of daily bread. Children who once struggled to remember the names of half a dozen local gods now recite Zarathustra's maxims by heart. They argue about whether good thinking is more important than good speaking, and correct their elders with exasperating precision. It is not enough to do good, Father. You must also mean it. You roll your eyes, but cannot help but notice that you are starting to use the new words yourself. It is not just as the vocabulary, but the shape of conversation that has changed. People hesitate before speaking, weighing each word. Jokes take longer to tell. Stories require more context. Even gossip, the lifeblood of village life, is couched in moral terms. Did you hear about the potter? He forgot to bless his kiln, but at least he admitted it honestly. Every failure is now an opportunity for public self examination. Language, it turns out, is an excellent tool for creating community and for drawing lines. The most enthusiastic followers of Zarathustra use the new words like badges, marking themselves as enlightened, while those who cling to the old tongue are subtly shamed. You see it happen to the goat herd, whose colorful curses are met with cold, patient correction until he mumbles, "May the wise Lord guide my speech," and falls silent for the rest of the day. A few resist outright. The merchant's wife, sharp-tongued and unrepentant, refuses to adopt the new phrases. A kind deed needs no long explanation, she says, and a melon is sweet or it is not. But even she finds herself adapting, slipping Zarathustra's name into complaints and blessings alike, just to be understood. In the evenings, as the family gathers around the hearth, you catch yourself reciting new maxims almost without thinking. "Let us eat in gratitude and order," you announce, surprising everyone, including yourself. Your youngest repeats it proudly, then demands to know what it means. You have no idea, but you smile and say, "It means we try our best." The answer satisfies her, and you feel, for a moment, that perhaps the words themselves are less important than the attempt to use them well. Of course, the language is not perfect. Some maxims are so long and complicated that nobody bothers with them. Others are so vague they can be used to justify anything. Arguments about interpretation abound, and it is not uncommon for two villagers to shout the same phrase at each other, each convinced it supports their side. Still, you sense that this flood of new words is more than just another layer of confusion. It is a sign that something real has changed, that people are trying, however clumsily, to live differently. The old language, like the old gods, cannot hold them anymore. At night, as you listen to the familiar, unfamiliar cadence of prayers drifting through the dark, you wonder what your ancestors would make of it all. Perhaps they would laugh. Perhaps they would be proud. Or perhaps, like you, they would simply do their best to keep up, one unwieldy sentence at a time. Suspicion, like a weed, grows best in soil that has been turned and troubled, and the village, so recently united in the noble struggle against boredom, is now a tangled garden of doubts. Once, you could rely on your neighbors for predictable pettiness, a borrowed tool never returned, a fence line moved by the width of a goat. Now, every look, every careless word, every silence is scrutinized for hidden darkness. You see it at the communal oven, where women line up to bake bread and news travels faster than the rising dough. Did you see how Sadaf hesitated before reciting the new prayer? Whispers one, eyes narrowed. She never looks anyone in the eye when she speaks of the wise Lord. Another mutters. There is always someone listening, always someone watching, eager to detect the faintest whiff of insincerity, or, worse, heresy. The men are no better. The old habit of casual boasts has been replaced by the careful posturing of moral certainty. At the well, they discuss not just the quality of the water, but who draws first and whether it is done with proper humility. The potter always insists on going last, one observes, but perhaps he only wants us to notice his humility. That is pride disguised. Another grunts. I saw the merchant speak kindly to the shepherd, but did you see how quickly he looked away? A man who fears being seen is a man with secrets. Family life is infected too. What was once the comfort of familiar squabbles is now a battleground of subtle accusations. Your daughter points at her brother. He only helped me carry water because he knew you were watching. He fires back. She only shares her bread so she can tell everyone she did it. You intervene, but the damage is done. They glare at each other, convinced that virtue itself is a contest, and that each must prove their goodness not only to you, but to the entire world. It is not just the young who suffer. Married couples, once bound by the gentle habits of compromise and mutual annoyance, now hold grudges in the language of righteousness. You only swept the step because I asked, your wife declares one evening, not because you wished to uphold order. You answer, with more honesty than wisdom, if I waited for inspiration, the house would never be clean. She sighs, but you see in her eyes the same uncertainty you feel. Is it enough to do good out of duty, or must you want to do good? And how can anyone ever be sure? Village meetings are now less about practical affairs and more about moral audits. When a neighbor's fence falls over, the discussion turns not to repairs, but to intentions. Did he let it fall as a test of our charity, or is he hoping to shame us into helping so he can claim moral credit? The question is never settled, and the fence, as often as not, remains in pieces until someone grows tired of arguing and quietly fixes it alone. You hear rumors of entire families torn apart by suspicion, brothers who refuse to share a meal for fear of being accused of selfishness, mothers who confess every imagined failing, not for forgiveness, but to avoid the accusation of secret pride. The wise boors, once satisfied with quoting Zarathustra, now specialize in sniffing out hypocrisy. Their favorite phrase is, "It is not deeds, but the heart that matters." But you notice they are most likely to say it when someone else is receiving praise. At the same time, suspicion has become its own ritual. You find yourself double guessing every compliment, every offer of help. When a neighbor brings you a loaf of bread, you hesitate before accepting. Is this kindness or an attempt to demonstrate superior virtue? When you return the favor, you wonder if your motives are pure or merely competitive. The priests try to intervene, urging people to assume the best and look for light in each other, but their voices are lost in the din of whispered accusations. Trust, it seems, is the only thing harder to maintain than virtue itself. Even Zarathustra's own followers are not immune. The purest and most earnest among them find themselves under suspicion for being too perfect. "Nobody is that good," the villagers murmur. "He must be hiding something." The new firekeeper, chosen for her spotless reputation, is now watched more closely than ever. Every missed gesture, every nervous glance is noted and discussed. You begin to miss the days when wrongdoing was obvious and unremarkable. A thief was a thief, a gossip was a gossip, and everyone knew where they stood. Now you live in a world where guilt is measured in micro expressions and where every deed is subject to endless reinterpretation. You catch yourself one morning practicing your own expressions of humility in the polished surface of a water jar, hoping to appear neither too proud nor too meek. Yet, beneath all the suspicion, something more hopeful lingers. The very act of watching each other, of caring so much about virtue, even if it is tinged with anxiety, is itself a form of community. The village, for all its quarrels, is united by the effort to choose the light, even if no one is ever quite sure who is winning. You fall asleep that night, exhausted by vigilance, comforted by the thought that perhaps it is better to live in a world where everyone is at least trying to do good, however clumsily. Still, you cannot help but dream of a day when you might simply accept a loaf of bread without wondering what it means. Children are quick to adapt, perhaps because they have not lived long enough to be nostalgic. If the world demands a new way of thinking, They embrace it with the enthusiasm of creatures who have not yet learned the comfort of mindless repetition. In the old days, a scuffle over a plum or a wrestling match in the dust was the closest thing to a philosophical debate the younger generation ever experienced. Now, the children of the village are junior philosophers, their games repurposed into endless arguments about good and evil, right and wrong. You watch as your own son and daughter, joined by half a dozen friends, sit in a circle near the well, faces solemn, voices hushed but intense. Who is more righteous, the one who tells the truth even when it hurts, or the one who protects a friend with a lie? The question is posed by the blacksmith's boy, his forehead creased in concentration. The truth teller, announces your daughter with conviction. But what if the truth brings pain? The shepherd's niece counters. Your son, caught between, offers the compromise. It depends on the reason. Zarathustra says intentions matter. Where once their play ended in laughter or tears, now it trails off into lengthy discussions that would try the patience of any adult. You find yourself eavesdropping, torn between pride and exhaustion. There is a strange satisfaction in knowing that your children can debate the moral weight of sharing figs or forgiving a slight, even as you wish they would simply run, shout, and forget to think for a little while. The school, such as it is, has become an arena for even fiercer contests. The teacher, once content to drone through lists of ancestors and festival dates, now finds herself refereeing disputes about the meaning of virtue and the hierarchy of good deeds. Which is better, asks the baker's daughter, to feed the hungry or to speak kindly to the lonely? The teacher, caught off guard, answers with a new proverb: a good deed with a kind word is best. The class groans at the vagueness, but no one suggests an alternative. Homework assignments now require essays on the nature of the light and how to choose the good in difficult circumstances. The brightest students compete not just for correct answers, but for the cleverest questions. The wise boars, ever alert, volunteer to lecture on the finer points of Zarathustra's teachings, much to the relief of parents who would prefer not to argue about the morality of cleaning one's room. The playground, once a battleground for simple physical disputes, is now a forum for case studies. If you promise to help carry water but forget, is that as bad as promising and refusing? Is it better to do a good deed in secret or to inspire others by being seen? Arguments become heated, alliances form and dissolve, tears are shed, not for scraped knees, but for misunderstood motives. Children accuse each other of pride, hypocrisy, or insincerity. You did not really mean to forgive me, shouts one. You just want the teacher to praise you, retorts another. Sometimes the parents intervene, but more often they stand aside, uncertain whether to encourage such seriousness or to tell the children to find a less exhausting way to play. After all, these debates mirror the adult's own struggles, only in smaller voices and quicker tempers. Yet, for all the fatigue, you notice that the children are less cruel than before. They still fight, of course, but the fights are followed by apologies, sometimes sincere, sometimes staged for an audience. The idea of forgiveness, once reserved for priests and elders, now crops up in the middle of disputes about skipping a turn or breaking a stick. You even hear them inventing rituals: a handshake, a shared stone, a whispered promise to choose the light tomorrow that close the argument, at least until the next game. What surprises you most is their creativity. Deprived of the lazy certainty of old customs, they invent new ones on the fly. If you say something mean, you have to do 3 good deeds, declares your daughter, adapting the words of Zarathustra into a playground rule. If you boast, you cannot be captain in the next game. These rules shift daily, but the idea remains. Goodness must be practiced, argued, demonstrated, and above all, noticed. Not everyone is pleased. The oldest villagers grumble that childhood should be simple, that children should be free from worry. The wise boars, however, are delighted. See, says the reciter, the next generation will be better than ours. They will choose the good with their whole hearts. You are not so sure. Sometimes you think that all these arguments do is teach children how to sound virtuous, not necessarily how to be virtuous. At home, you notice subtle changes. Your daughter reminds you to speak with kindness, even when tired. Your son corrects you when you mutter a lazy complaint about a neighbor. Father, Zarathustra says we should assume good intentions. It is infuriating, and yet, as you look at their hopeful faces, you wonder if this is how change takes root, not in grand speeches or new temples, but in the endless, exhausting conversations of children. You remember your own childhood, how simple it seemed, how safe. Yet was it really better or only easier? As you lie awake at night, you realize you cannot go back, and that perhaps you would not want to, even if you could. The future, with all its uncertainties and tedious debates, belongs to your children now. You fall asleep listening to their muffled voices, still debating the ethics of sharing bread in the dark, and for once, you are almost glad for the noise. If this is the price of change, you think, then perhaps it is worth paying, one earnest, exhausting conversation at a time. It is a strange thing to witness the end of an era, especially when it arrives not with thunder or blood, but with tired sighs and the slow turning of the seasons. Zarathustra's words, once whispered in secret, now echo openly in the market, in the home, at every village gathering. The old ways are not simply abandoned, they are transformed, dissected, and finally set aside with a mixture of relief and regret. You stand in the crowd as Zarathustra, his hair a little grayer, his face more drawn, rises to speak. It is not the first time, and it will not be the last, but everyone senses that something is ending. The fire in the temple burns steadily, brighter than ever, but no one is watching the flames. All eyes are fixed on the prophet and on the possibility that this, at last, is the true beginning of the new order. He begins not with a shout or a flourish, but with the same dry patience that has always defined him. His words are slow, careful, as if he knows you are all weary of arguments. We have spoken much, he says, of light and darkness, truth and lie. We have tried to purify our hands, our homes, our words, and our thoughts. Some days we have succeeded, many days we have failed. There is a murmur of recognition from the crowd, relief almost. At last, someone admits it. This struggle is not only difficult, it is endless. Zarathustra continues, the struggle does not end because you are tired. It does not end when the old gods are silent, or when the festivals change, or when you forget the words to the old prayers. The struggle ends only when you stop caring. He looks around, eyes lingering on the elders, the children, the priests, the wise boors, the ordinary villagers who have carried the burden of choice longer than they ever imagined they could. You ask if you are better than you were, he says, but that is not the question. Ask instead whether you have chosen even badly. The world is changed by those who choose, not by those who wait. People shift uneasily. Some look down at their feet, others up at the unremarkable sky. It is an uncomfortable moment because you all know how many times you have chosen comfort over courage, silence over truth, habit over hope. But Zarathustra does not scold. Instead, he tells a story, one you have heard before, but which now sounds new. He speaks of a man who, in his youth, believed he could do no wrong. He followed every rule, spoke every blessing, kept his hands clean, and his eyes averted. Yet as he grew older, he realized that righteousness was not the absence of sin, but the willingness to notice it and to begin again every day with humility. No one is made pure by habit alone, Zarathustra says. We are made pure by the effort to choose light, even when we fail. The crowd is silent. You realize that, for the first time in memory, no one is waiting to argue, to correct, or to quote a proverb. Instead, everyone is listening, not just to Zarathustra, but to the echo of his words inside themselves. He concludes, you are tired because you are awake. You are anxious because you care. Do not look for peace in sleep or in the silence of old certainties. Peace is found in the struggle and in the company of those who struggle beside you. For a long moment, nobody moves. Then the children, as always, are the first to break the spell, whispering to each other, picking at the grass, already half distracted by the promise of a new game or a fresh argument. The adults linger, not quite ready to return to their homes, as if reluctant to let go of this last moment of communal purpose. Later, as dusk gathers, you hear neighbors talking in low voices, not about the old gods, not even about Zarathustra, but about their own choices, their own doubts. There is less certainty now, but also less loneliness. Even disagreement, it seems, has become a kind of comfort, proof that everyone is trying, that no one has given up. At home, the evening is quieter than usual. The children are tired, the fire burns low, and your wife sits beside you in companionable silence. For once, You do not feel compelled to fill the air with words, old or new. You think of all the arguments, all the careful decisions, all the moments when you could have chosen better, and you find, to your surprise, that you are grateful for each one. You understand, finally, that boredom has not been defeated by excitement or certainty, but by the slow, awkward work of becoming someone who cares. The struggle between light and darkness is not a story with an ending, but a habit you take up each morning, as ordinary and necessary as sweeping the floor or feeding the fire. As night falls, you close your eyes and listen, not for the old gods, not even for Zarathustra, but for the gentle murmur of your family, your neighbors, your village, imperfect, uncertain, and awake together in the long, beautiful darkness. When it is finally over, if such a thing can ever be said to be over, you find yourself standing at the edge of the square, the fire temple behind you, and a long stretch of unremarkable road ahead. The crowd has thinned. The last of Zarathustra's words still echo in the air, not as thunder, but as a quiet, persistent hum. The sun sinks slowly, and you feel a kind of gentle fatigue, less from the day's work than from the years of arguments, questions, and choices. For the first time in a long while, you do not hurry home. Instead, you linger, watching as the villagers file away, some in pairs, some alone, some already picking up the old habits in small ways, others clutching tightly to the new. The night air is cool. The smell of smoke hangs above the rooftops, and you realize that no one expects you to do anything in particular. You are free in the most exhausting sense of the word. The new era does not announce itself with trumpets. No festivals are declared, no monuments built, at least none that anyone will remember in another generation. There are no songs for Zarathustra, no epic poems for the dawn of the wise lord's struggle. There are only new habits, awkwardly stitched onto the old, and the endless, quiet search for meaning among the ashes. You walk home past the empty shrine where the old gods used to reside. Someone has swept the steps, but no new offerings are left, just a single clean stone and a faint trace of incense. You pause, half tempted to whisper a prayer, but the words do not come. You realize, with a start, that you are not sad. The absence of the old faith is not a wound, but an empty space waiting to be filled with something more honest, if less certain. Inside your house, everything is changed and unchanged. The fire burns as always, but your wife sits quietly, not reciting the old prayers, not counting the day's confessions, simply watching the flame. The children are already asleep, their faces soft and untroubled, at least until tomorrow, when the next moral dilemma will arrive with breakfast. You sit and listen to the sounds of the night, distant laughter, the creak of a door, the low murmur of neighbors saying good night. There is no sense of triumph, only the knowledge that you have come through something vast and strange together. The village is smaller now, and larger too, shaped by the weight of new words, new choices, and the simple, relentless honesty that Zarathustra demanded from all of you. In the quiet, Your mind drifts to the past. You remember the world before, all those sleepy, endless days when boredom was the closest thing to comfort. You remember the old festivals, the lazy certainty of ritual, the soft security of a life where nothing was ever truly at stake. Part of you misses it, the way a child misses the idea of a parent who was never quite there. But you also remember the fear that nothing you did mattered, that life was a series of accidents and superstitions, that your soul was as anonymous as a single grain of sand. Now there is a different kind of fear, the fear of getting it wrong, of choosing badly, of failing to live up to a standard that seems to move a little further away every day. Yet even this is better, somehow. At least it is real. At least it is yours. You realize you are not alone in this feeling. The whole village, whether it admits it or not, is learning to carry this new, heavier boredom. A boredom that comes not from emptiness, but from the sheer, endless work of being awake. Even when nothing is happening, there is the quiet drama of self examination, of wondering if you could have been kinder or braver or truer. It is a heavy burden, but it is also a kind of freedom. Occasionally, you catch glimpses of Zarathustra in the distance, a gray figure moving slowly between the houses, pausing to speak with those who still seek him out. He never stays long. Perhaps he knows that his work is done, or perhaps he is simply tired of questions. You wonder what he thinks of what you have all become. Not saints, not heroes, not even particularly virtuous, just ordinary people trying, failing, and trying again. As the night deepens, you feel the world settle around you. There are no answers, only the comfort of knowing that the struggle continues, that every choice, however small, is another step along a road with no map. There is a kind of peace in that, a peace built not on certainty, but on honest effort. You go to bed at last, more tired than usual, but strangely hopeful. Tomorrow will bring more decisions, more doubts, more arguments about light and darkness, truth and lie. But it will also bring the familiar, the warmth of the fire, the laughter of your children, the quiet pride of having survived this long, slow transformation. And as you drift into sleep, you realize you would not trade this new world, not for all the boredom in old Persia, for all its struggles, its weariness, its endless midnight questions. It is finally a world you can call your own.